Clara Whitmore did not cry when her father slid the paper across the kitchen table. She did not cry when she read her own name written beside a stranger's. She did not cry when her mother turned away and pretended not to see. She picked up the pen. She signed. And the moment the ink dried, something inside her went very, very quiet, like a door closing on a room she would never enter again. She was 21 years old, and she had just sold herself to save people who couldn't even look her in the eye. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell so you never miss a single chapter. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, stay with me, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about this woman and the man she was forced to marry. The paper was still on the table when Clara walked out of the kitchen. She did not take it with her. She did not need to. Every word of it was already burned into the back of her eyes. Her name, his name, the sum of money that had apparently decided her entire future, and her father's signature, which had been written first before she had even entered the room. She stood on the porch of the Whitmore farmhouse and looked out at the fields her father had worked for 20 years. The soil was cracked and pale. The fences needed mending. The barn roof had been patched with salvaged wood for so long that it barely looked like a barn anymore. 2 years of dry summers and one brutal winter had broken the land before it had broken the man who worked it. And now, it was breaking her. She heard her mother moving behind the thin wall, rattling pots, clattering dishes, doing anything that made noise so she wouldn't have to come outside and say something she couldn't take back. Her younger sister Nora, age 14, appeared in the doorway. "Clara." Her voice was small. "Papa said you're going to be all right." "Did he?" "He said the man is rich. He said you'll have everything you need." Clara turned and looked at her sister, at the worn hem of her dress, the shadows under her eyes from nights they'd all gone to bed with their stomachs less than full. She looked at Nora, the way you look at something you are about to leave behind, and cannot say so. "Go back inside," Clara said. "It's getting cold." "Are you scared?" Clara was quiet for a long moment. "No," she lied. She was terrified. Not of the man, she hadn't met him yet, and terror requires a face to attach itself to. She was terrified of the shape of the life she could already see forming ahead of her, hard and narrow as a canyon, with no exit. She was 21 years old, and she had just traded every possibility she'd ever imagined for a paid-off debt and a stranger's last name. She went back inside before Nora could see anything on her face she wasn't ready to explain. Her father was still at the kitchen table. He hadn't moved the paper. He sat with his hands folded over it, the way a man folds his hands over something he is trying to keep from floating away. "Clara," he said without looking up. "I signed it," she said. "I know." "You didn't ask me first." "I know." He exhaled, and it was the sound of a man who had run out of room to breathe. "I didn't have a choice." "You had one," she said. "You just didn't want to make it." He looked up then. His eyes were red at the edges. She had not seen her father cry since her grandfather's funeral, and she did not want to see it now. She turned before it could happen. "When do I go?" she asked. 3 weeks. She nodded once and walked to her room and closed the door behind her and did not speak to anyone for the rest of the evening. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and told herself things that were not entirely true. She told herself she was strong enough for this. She told herself she had survived worse, though she wasn't sure that was accurate. She told herself James Carter was just a man, and men could be managed if you were careful enough, quiet enough, useful enough. She had heard the name James Carter spoken in Red Willow her entire life. He was not the kind of man people forgot to mention. He owned Carter Ranch, which was the largest cattle operation in the valley, and possibly in the entire county, depending on who you asked. He had come to Montana from somewhere east, no one agreed on exactly where, and he had built the ranch up from nothing over the course of about 15 years. By the time Clara was old enough to understand what money meant, Carter Ranch was already part of the landscape, the way mountains are part of the landscape, present enormous and not particularly interested in how you felt about them. People described James Carter with the same vocabulary they used for weather. Cold, quiet, hard to read, capable of causing damage without any obvious warning. He was somewhere around 40, she'd been told, though no one seemed to know his exact age. He was not married, had never been married. Nobody in town knew why, and the theories varied wildly depending on who was doing the talking. Some said he was too difficult to live with. Some said he had loved someone once, and she had died. Some said he simply didn't need anyone, which was the detail that frightened Clara the most, because a man who had convinced himself he didn't need anyone was a man who had no practice in considering what the person beside him might need. She lay down in her bed that night fully dressed and stared at the ceiling until the house went quiet, and then she stared at it some more. She made herself a promise in the dark. She would go. She would honor the agreement because her family's survival depended on it, and she was not the kind of woman who let children go hungry to preserve her own comfort. She would be useful. She would be competent. She would manage the household the way she had always managed the household, and she would not complain, and she would not weep, and she would not under any circumstances allow herself to mistake obligation for affection or kindness for something more than strategy. She would survive James Carter the way she had survived everything else, by keeping her heart behind a locked door and the key in her pocket. The 3 weeks passed in a strange, suspended way. Life continued. Meals were cooked. The younger children went to school. Her father worked the fields with the kind of desperate energy men use when they are trying to outrun their own conscience. Her mother began hemming Clara's 2 best dresses and pressing them with unusual care, as though the condition of the stitching might matter in a situation like this. Nobody talked about it directly. Neighbors came to call and spoke in soft voices about what a fine arrangement it was, what a good man James Carter was, how fortunate Clara ought to feel, which was something people always said to women who were being handed from one set of circumstances to another and were expected to be grateful for the journey. Clara smiled and offered coffee and said very little and waited for them to leave. One afternoon, 3 days before she was to go, a woman named Harriet Boone stopped by. She was the postmistress in town, about 60 years old, and she had the particular quality of someone who had seen enough of life to stop being surprised by most of it. She found Clara on the porch mending a shirt. "You doing all right, girl?" Harriet asked. "I'm fine," Clara said. "You're a terrible liar," Harriet said pleasantly, and sat herself down in the other chair. "I knew James Carter's mother years ago, before she passed. She was a strong woman, good woman. She raised that boy mostly on her own, after his father left." Clara's needle paused. "I didn't know that," she said. "Most people don't. He doesn't talk about it." Harriet folded her hands in her lap. "I'm not going to tell you he's a warm man because I'd be stretching the truth. But I will tell you he's not what people say. Men who are truly cold don't leave sacks of flour on widows' porches in the middle of winter and ride away before anyone sees them. I've seen it twice." Clara looked up from the mending. "He does that." "He does." Harriet stood brushing off her skirt. "I'm not saying love him, child. I'm saying don't decide what he is before you've looked at him properly." She paused. "That's the advice I wish someone had given me at your age." She left without another word. Clara sat with that for a long time. She did not know what to do with it. She had constructed a very precise picture of James Carter in her mind. Cold, solitary, transactional. And it was a picture that served her. It kept her expectations low, and her walls high, which was exactly where she needed them. She did not want Harriet Boone introducing cracks into that picture with stories about flour sacks and widows. But the cracks appeared anyway. The morning she left, her father came to stand beside the wagon while the driver loaded her single suitcase. He looked older than she remembered, though she had been looking at him every day. Grief has a way of aging people overnight when you finally let yourself see it. "Clara," he said. "Don't," she said. "I need you to know. Don't." She kept her voice very even. "I know what you need me to know. I understand why you did it. I'm not angry." She paused. "But I can't hear it right now. Maybe later." He nodded. His jaw worked for a moment like a man chewing words he couldn't swallow. "You were always the strongest of all of us," he said finally. She did not respond to that. She climbed into the wagon, sat straight, and looked forward. She did not look back as it pulled away. She almost did, once, but she tightened her jaw and kept her eyes forward and told herself that looking back served no one, least of all the woman she needed to be for whatever came next. Carter Ranch was a half-day's ride from town, which was enough time for Clara to rehearse 3 different versions of herself. The capable one, the dignified one, the one who absolutely was not frightened. By the time the wagon turned onto the long drive leading to the main house, she had settled on something in between all 3, and slightly unsatisfying as all compromises tend to be. The house was larger than she expected, not in the way that grand houses are built to impress you. There was no decoration, no unnecessary width, no porch furniture arranged to signal prosperity. It was large in the way that working spaces grow large over time as rooms get added when they're needed and windows get knocked through, where the light is best, and practicality wins over aesthetics at every turn. It was the house of a man who spent his time doing things, not a man who spent his time being looked at. A ranch hand came to take the wagon. He was young, maybe 17, with ears that stood at slight attention and a hat that didn't fit quite right. "You the new missus?" he asked. "I'm Clara Whitmore," she said, which was not exactly an answer but was the most she was willing to offer. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Carter's expecting you. He's in the east stable." She stood in front of the house for a moment after the wagon pulled away. She had expected someone to come out and greet her. A housekeeper, a foreman, James Carter himself. Some kind of reception that would give her a moment to compose what her face was doing before anyone looked at it. Instead, she was standing alone in front of a large, quiet house with the wind moving through the grass around her, and not a soul in sight. She picked up her suitcase. She walked toward the east stable. She found James Carter inside, crouched beside a horse that was lying on its side. Not a position horses typically occupy willingly, which meant this one was in some kind of distress. He had his hand flat against the animal's neck just below the jaw, and he was speaking in a low voice she couldn't quite hear from the doorway. The horse's breathing was ragged, and Clara could see the visible effort of each breath. She stood in the doorway. He didn't look up. Either he hadn't heard her come in, or he had, and the horse took priority, which under the circumstances was probably the correct call. She waited. After a moment he said, still without looking up, "Give her another minute." "All right," Clara said. The horse's breathing steadied. Not completely, not easily, but enough. James stood, and Clara had her first real look at him. He was tall, genuinely tall. Not tall in the way that men in conversation seem taller because they're standing close to you. He was built the way men are built by decades of physical work, not by intention, but by accumulated consequence. His hair was dark, going gray at the temples, and his face was weathered, in the particular way of a man who had spent the better part of his life outdoors and had stopped registering it as hardship approximately 30 years ago. His eyes, when he finally looked at her, were a very dark brown. Calm, watchful. Not warm exactly, but not cold in the way she had expected. He looked at her the way a careful person looks at something they are trying to understand before they speak. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Carter." A pause that lasted about 2 seconds longer than comfortable. "Is your horse all right?" she asked, because something had to be said, and she had chosen not to start with anything about herself. "She will be," he said. "She tends to get herself worked up over nothing, and then needs help remembering she's fine." He looked at the horse once more, then back at Clara. "You want to come inside?" It wasn't quite a question, but it wasn't a command either. It was an offer delivered in the flat, economic tone of a man who didn't use extra words because he hadn't found them useful. "Yes," she said. She followed him out of the stable and toward the house. He walked at a pace that did not account for her shorter stride, and then halfway across the yard slowed slightly without commenting on it. She noticed this. She filed it away. Inside the house was clean and spare. The furniture was solid and old and clearly chosen for durability rather than appearance. There were books on a shelf in the front room, more than she had expected, and better ones. A jacket hung on a hook beside the door. A pair of muddy boots were placed with unusual precision on a mat beside it, heels aligned as though precision in small things was the habit of a man who had too much chaos in large ones. He led her to the kitchen and set a coffee pot on the stove. She sat at the table. He sat across from her, and they regarded each other with the particular wary courtesy of two people who are stuck with a situation they didn't engineer alone. "I want to say something to you," he said before we go any further. "All right," she said. "Your father came to me," he said. "I didn't go to him. I want you to understand that." "I know," she said. "He told me. The debt is paid. That's done regardless of what happens here." He set his hands flat on the table, which she noticed was the gesture of a man who felt more anchored with his palms against something solid. "If you decide you don't want this marriage, you can go. Today. Tomorrow. A month from now. Your family's situation won't change based on your decision." She looked at him carefully. "You'd let me leave," she said. "I'd let you choose," he said. "There's a difference." She was quiet for a moment. She had expected him to use the debt as leverage. She had expected the conversation to begin with some gentle version of the terms, the understanding of what she owed him, the careful laying out of obligation, disguised as generosity. She had steeled herself for it on the entire ride over, had constructed her responses, had been ready to be very clear about what she would and would not accept. She had not been ready for this. "Why?" she asked. He looked at her steadily. "Because I've had things decided for me before. I didn't care for it." The coffee pot began to make noise on the stove. He stood and poured 2 cups and set one in front of her without asking how she took it, which was a small assumption, but not an unreasonable one. She wrapped her hands around the cup. "I signed an agreement," she said. "You signed it under pressure," he said. "That's not the same as making a choice." She studied his face for a long moment, looking for the angle, the strategy, the thing underneath the words. She was good at reading people. She had spent enough of her life managing difficult situations to have developed a fairly reliable sense of when someone was being honest and when they were being careful with the truth. She couldn't find it here. He appeared, as far as she could tell, to be exactly what he looked like, a man who said what he meant because he didn't see the value in saying anything else. "I'll stay," she said. "For now." "All right," he said. No relief, no satisfaction, just acknowledgement, as though the outcome was one of several possible answers, and he had been equally prepared for the others. "I want to be useful," she said. "I know how to manage a household. I know accounts. I can read, and I can calculate, and I won't be a decoration." "I didn't expect you would be," he said. "And I want to understand how this ranch operates," she said. "Not because I intend to interfere, because I need to understand the thing I'm part of." He looked at her with that same careful, weighing expression. "I can do that," he said. "And I need you to understand something," she said. "I am here because I chose to be, not because I owe you, not because I have nowhere else to go. I chose this because my family needed it, and that's a choice I made with my eyes open. But I will not be made to feel like a debt being repaid." The silence that followed was long enough that she thought she might have misjudged him, that the careful, level-toned man would flinch or stiffen or recalibrate into something colder. He did none of those things. "That's fair," he said simply. She exhaled a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "All right," she said. "Then I suppose we should figure out how this works." The first weeks were a study in carefully managed distance. Clara learned the house with the methodical thoroughness she applied to everything. The routines of it, the rhythms which hinges squeaked and which floorboards protested, and where the wind came through in ways that would need addressing before winter. She introduced herself to the cook, a sturdy woman named May, who had been with Carter Ranch for 11 years, and regarded Clara's arrival with the specific watchfulness of someone who had seen situations like this go badly before, and was reserving judgment. "Mr. Carter's particular about his mornings," May told her on the second day. "He doesn't take well to noise before 6. "I'm not particularly noisy," Clara said. "He doesn't take well to being talked at before he's ready to talk either. I'm not particularly chatty." May looked at her for a moment, then nodded, which Clara took as a provisional passing of whatever test was being administered. The ranch hands were another matter entirely. There were 9 of them, ranging from a boy of 16 to a weathered man of about 60 named Rupert, who had apparently been on the ranch since James had first acquired the land and had strong opinions about the proper way to do everything, which he shared frequently and without much encouragement. They were not unkind to Clara, but they were uncertain of her, which manifested as a particular brand of excessive courtesy that was almost as uncomfortable as outright dismissal. They tipped their hats and said ma'am, and held doors that she had not asked to have held, and carefully avoided saying anything in her presence that might have required explanation. She spent her 3rd morning at the ranch sitting down with the household accounts. The books were kept in a wooden box in the study off the main room, and she had asked James on her first full day whether she might look at them, and he had said yes with the same uncomplicated directness he seemed to apply to all practical requests. The accounts were not in disaster. They were not even particularly disorganized. But they were the accounts of a man who tracked money spent and money earned, without particularly analyzing the space between those two things, which meant that there were several places where small adjustments could produce meaningful savings, and James Carter had simply never had the time, or perhaps the interest, to identify them. She spent 3 hours with the books and then made a list. That evening, James came in from the fields as the sun was going down. She had noticed he was always the last one in and the first one out, which was a detail she added to the pile of things she was accumulating about him with no particular plan for what to do with them. "I looked at the accounts," she said when he came to the kitchen. He sat down and accepted the coffee May set in front of him. "And you're paying 3 separate vendors for supplies that one of them carries at a lower price. You're also running the household on a quarterly purchasing schedule when a monthly one would prevent the kind of emergency buying that costs more." He looked at her. "I'm not criticizing," she said. "You've been running this place alone. There's only so much one person can track." "What would you change?" he asked. She showed him the list. He read through it without interrupting her. This was something she noticed about him: he didn't interrupt. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he appeared to have developed the habit of waiting until a person had finished before determining what needed to be said in response. "That's good," he said when she finished. "Do it." No committee, no second guessing, no asking whether she was sure. She had expected him to at minimum ask a few questions. She had her answers ready. He just said, "Do it," as though the quality of her reasoning was evident and objection would be wasted effort. She went back to the accounts. She was aware in a remote and carefully managed way that her expectations were beginning to slide slightly out of position. She had built a very clear picture of James Carter. Cold, solitary, a man who had purchased a wife the way he might purchase additional acreage for utility rather than affection. And there were pieces of him that fit that picture. He was quiet sometimes to the point of seeming absent, even when he was in the same room. He had moods that she was learning to read the way you read weather, a certain quality of stillness that meant he was working something out and would prefer not to be spoken to, a restlessness that meant a problem was pressing and hadn't resolved yet. But there were other pieces that didn't fit at all. The way he spoke to the young ranch hand Billy, who had made a significant mistake with the cattle records and had been standing in the yard, white-faced and braced for consequences. She had heard James's voice from the kitchen window, low and even, and had held her breath, waiting for the anger. "A mistake can be corrected," she heard him say. "A person can learn. Now sit down and I'll walk you through it again." She stood very still at the kitchen window for a long moment after that. She saw him 3 days later leave a covered dish on the porch of old Elias Morrow, who farmed a small plot to the north and had lost his entire wheat crop to a fungus that summer. James did not knock. He did not wait to be thanked. He set the dish down, turned, and walked back to his horse. She was watching from the road. He didn't know she was there. That was the part that mattered, that he wasn't performing it. The kindness was not for an audience. It was simply what he did, the way a person does things that have become so basic to how they move through the world that they don't register them as acts of virtue anymore. They are simply acts. She thought about what Harriet Boone had said. Don't decide what he is before you've looked at him properly. She was looking. She wasn't sure she was ready for what she was seeing. One evening, toward the end of her second week, she was in the study working by lamplight when she heard him come in. He was later than usual. She had noticed without meaning to that she had been aware of the specific sound of the front door, the particular weight of his step in the hallway, the point in the evening when the house settled into a different kind of quiet, because he was in it. She was not ready to think about what that awareness meant. He knocked on the study door, her study door, as he'd taken to calling it, which was itself a thing she was not examining too closely, and leaned in the frame. Still at it, he said. I found another vendor discrepancy, she said. For leather goods. Of course you did. Something moved in his voice that wasn't quite humor, but was adjacent to it. You're back late, she said before she could stop herself. He looked at her for a moment. One of the calves was having a hard time, he said. I stayed with her. Is she all right? She is now. He said it with a flatness that she had come to understand was not indifference, but its opposite, the way a person who cares about something very much learns to speak about it in a controlled register, because caring too openly has cost them something before. Good, she said. He nodded and started to go, then paused. You don't have to work this late, he said. I know, she said. I'm not doing it because I have to. Another one of those pauses, the ones she had stopped filling with unnecessary words, because she'd noticed he used silence the way other people used conversation, as a space where things got settled. All right, he said. He left. She sat for a moment with her hands in her lap and the lamp burning, and the leather goods discrepancy in front of her, and told herself firmly that none of this was what it was starting to feel like. The town, of course, had opinions. She went with May into Red Willow for supplies at the end of her second week, and she felt the shift the moment they stepped down from the wagon. Heads turned, conversations altered. The particular current of attention that runs through small towns when something has happened that everyone wants to discuss, but no one wants to be caught discussing. At the dry goods store, two women she vaguely recognized from church said good morning to May and looked at Clara with the specific kind of bright searching courtesy that is more examination than greeting. You're the Carter girl, one of them said. The new wife. Clara Whitmore, Clara said pleasantly. How are you finding it out there? The other said. Carter Ranch. He's not an easy man from what I hear. I find it very well, Clara said. He bought her family's debt, I heard. The first woman said to the second in the tone people use when they are speaking about someone as though that person is not present to hear them. The whole farm. Apparently they were about to lose everything. A shame, the second woman said, looking at Clara with the particular expression of someone who is performing sympathy while engaging in something closer to satisfaction. If it was such a shame, Clara said. Still pleasant, still even, perhaps someone might have helped them before it came to that. Both women blinked. Clara smiled at them and turned to the counter to place her order. She was aware of May beside her, doing an admirable job of not reacting. On the way back to the wagon, May said, You handled that well. I've been handling things like that my whole life, Clara said. I expect you have. A pause. For what it's worth, and I know it's not my place, he's a better man than they make him out to be. I know, Clara said. May looked at her sideways. You've figured that out already, have you? I've been paying attention, Clara said. May made a small sound that was not a laugh, but was something in the same territory. Well, she said, that's more than most people manage. They drove back to Carter Ranch in the late afternoon light, and Clara sat beside May and watched the land roll by the long grass and the far mountains and the enormous open sky of Montana, and something about the bigness of it released a pressure she had been carrying in her chest since the morning she'd signed that paper. She did not let herself name the feeling, but she noticed it was there. She had come to this place expecting a cage. She had not expected it to feel incrementally and against all her intentions, like something else entirely. She had not expected the man she feared to be a man who waited until she was finished speaking before he responded. She had not expected him to have books she'd wanted to read, and coffee that was better than anything she'd had at home, and a way of saying her name that was different from how anyone else said it. Not softer exactly, but more deliberate, as though each syllable was worth the time it took. She had not expected to lie awake at night, thinking about a man who set covered dishes on an old farmer's porch and walked away without waiting to be seen. She pressed her lips together and looked at the mountains, and told herself again firmly that she was managing her circumstances, and not under any circumstances beginning to feel something she had specifically promised herself she would not feel. She was almost convinced. Almost. And in the east stable, as the wagon pulled back down the long drive toward the house, James Carter stood with his hand against the neck of the same horse he'd been tending when Clara arrived. Steadier, now breathing even eyes soft, and he thought about the woman who had sat across from him at that kitchen table, and said, "I will not be made to feel like a debt being repaid," with a voice that did not shake even a little. He had not expected that. He had not expected her. He set his jaw and went back to work and told himself that was all there was to it. He was almost convinced too. She almost convinced herself she was managing it well. That was the thing about resolve. It held up beautifully in theory and showed its cracks the moment real life applied pressure to it. The pressure arrived on a Tuesday in the form of a broken fence line and a missing calf, and James Carter coming in from 3 hours of cold morning work with blood on his sleeve that was not his own, and Clara standing in the kitchen doorway watching him without saying a single word, because every word she had prepared for moments like this had temporarily vacated her mind. "It's the calves," he said before she could ask. "She's fine." Caught her leg on the wire. "Sit down," Clara said. He looked at her. "Sit down," she said again. "Let me see your hands." "My hands are fine." "James?" She said his name with the particular tone of a woman who is not asking a second time, and something about it, maybe the directness, maybe the fact that it was simply his name and nothing else, made him pull out a chair and sit. She checked his hands. A cut along the right palm, not deep but ragged, the kind of thing that gets infected if you ignore it because you're too busy to consider the possibility of your own inconvenience. "You should have come in sooner," she said. "I had to get the calf settled." "The calf is a calf," she said, cleaning the cut with a cloth and the iodine she had relocated to the kitchen cabinet specifically because she had learned within the first week that James Carter treated his own injuries as administrative afterthoughts. "You're the one who runs this ranch." The calf was frightened. "And you weren't?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't get frightened," he said. "Everybody gets frightened," she said. "Some people just get very good at not showing it." She felt him look at her. She kept her attention on his hand. "You learned that yourself," he said, "or did someone tell you?" "I learned it," she said. "The same way you did, I imagine." She wrapped his hand and stepped back, and they were briefly unexpectedly close. The kind of close that happens in kitchens when there isn't quite enough room and neither person moves away as quickly as the situation technically requires. She moved first. Back to the stove. May left biscuits, she said, because it was practical and present and had nothing to do with the way the distance between them had felt briefly less like distance and more like a decision. He ate the biscuits and drank his coffee and didn't say another word about his hand, but before he went back out, he paused at the door and said without turning around, "Thank you, Clara." Not Miss Whitmore. Clara. She stood at the sink and breathed very carefully for about 30 seconds after the door closed, and then she went back to the accounts and did not think about it. She thought about it all morning. The thing about living alongside a person is that you learn them the way you learn a language, gradually. Then suddenly, with a moment of fluency that arrives before you, quite notice you've been studying. Clara had been paying attention to James Carter with the precise attention of a woman who was absolutely not developing feelings for the man she had married under duress, and the result of all that precise attention was that she now knew him well enough to recognize exactly the things he tried to keep from being recognized. She knew that he drank his first cup of coffee standing up at the kitchen window facing east, and that this was not negotiable. She knew that he had a book on the nightstand that he read for exactly 20 minutes before sleep. She had seen the lamp under the door, and that it was the same book rotating through a short stack, never new ones, as though new stories were not something he trusted yet. She knew that when a problem was pressing him, he walked the fence line of the south pasture alone, and that he always came back with whatever it was resolved or resolved enough to work with. She knew that he was kinder to animals in pain than most men were to their own children. She knew that he had not once in 3 weeks raised his voice at a single person on that ranch. And she knew, though she had no intention of acting on this knowledge, that when he was in the same room as her, the particular quality of his attention, steady, unhurried, specific, made her feel more seen than she had felt in a very long time. It was Rupert who delivered the first real blow to her carefully maintained composure. He found her in the barn on a Thursday afternoon, making notes on the feed inventory, and he stood in the doorway with the manner of a man who had been working up to something for a while. "Mrs. Carter," he said. "Clara's fine Rupert." "Clara." He turned his hat in his hands. "You know how long I've been on this ranch?" 11 years, you told me. 14 now, since he bought the land." He nodded slowly. "I watched him build this place from 40 head of cattle and a house that didn't have a proper roof. I watched him work himself near to death 2 winters running and never ask a single soul for help." He paused. "I watched him sit in that kitchen for 11 nights straight when his mother was dying, reading to her because her eyes had gone. He didn't tell anybody that. I only knew because I came in early one morning and heard him." Clara put her pen down. "He read to her every night for 11 days, Rupert said. "And when she passed, he came out the next morning and started work at the same time he always did, and nobody said anything to him about it, because nobody knew what to say, and he didn't ask them to know." He stopped turning his hat. "What I'm saying is that man in there has been carrying every single thing alone for a very long time, and he's not going to ask you to help him carry it. But that doesn't mean he doesn't need it." He put his hat back on. "That's all I wanted to say," he said and walked out. Clara sat in the barn for a long time without moving. The image of it had taken hold of her in a way she couldn't shake. James at a kitchen table reading aloud to a dying woman for 11 nights alone, and then coming out the next morning and picking up the work, because the work was what he had, and he didn't know how to ask for anything else. She had come to this ranch braced for a man who used his strength as a weapon. She had found one who used it as a wall. The distinction was everything. That evening she made soup, not because May needed help, but because her hands needed something to do, and the situation needed the domesticity of a pot on a stove, something warm and ordinary against the press of all these things she was feeling and refusing to name. She was stirring it when James came in, and she said without turning around, "Your mother, did she like to be read to?" The silence that followed was the specific kind that tells you something has landed in a place that wasn't expecting to be touched. "Rupert talked to you," he said. "Yes." A long pause. "She liked Dickens," he said finally. "She said it was the only writing that moved fast enough to keep up with real life." Clara stirred the soup. "She sounds like someone worth knowing," she said. "She was," he said. "She was the best person I've ever known." His voice was level, even, controlled in the way that things are controlled when they have been controlled for so long that the control is its own kind of grief. "I'm sorry she's gone," Clara said. "It's been 6 years," he said, as though time was a reasonable substitute for the acknowledgement of loss. "That doesn't really matter," she said. "Some losses don't get smaller. You just get better at carrying them." Another silence. Longer this time. "Yeah," he said, quietly. "That's about right." She turned around and set 2 bowls on the table, and they ate the soup together, and they didn't talk much. But the quiet between them was different from the quiet of the first week, less like distance, and more like the specific comfortable absence of speech between 2 people who have stopped needing to fill the air to prove they're present. She noticed the difference. She was not sure he did. She was wrong about that. The moment the entire dynamic cracked open came at the end of her 4th week, and it came from an unexpected direction. Richard Holloway rode onto Carter Ranch on a Friday morning. Clara was in the study when she heard the horse. She looked up, and through the window she saw a man dismounting at the gate, well-dressed for the frontier, the kind of well-dressed that announces money rather than wearing it lightly. He was perhaps 50 broad-shouldered, with the bearing of someone accustomed to entering spaces as though they already belonged to him. She had heard the name. Richard Holloway owned the Holloway land parcel to the east, a significant stretch of territory that shared a border with Carter Ranch along the south fence line. The specifics of their relationship she hadn't yet worked out, but she had noticed that the one time his name had come up in conversation, James's expression had done something subtle and unhappy that he'd smoothed out quickly. She went to the kitchen doorway. James was already outside. She couldn't hear everything, but she could hear the register of it. Holloway's voice carrying the expansive ease of a man who is pitching something, and James's responses clipped and final, in the way of a man who has already decided the answer and is waiting for the other person to finish speaking. After about 10 minutes, Holloway left. James came back inside. He went directly to the stove, poured coffee, drank half of it standing, and set the cup down with more precision than usual. "Who is he?" Clara asked. "A man with an offer I'm not interested in." "What kind of offer?" He turned and looked at her. His jaw was set. "He wants to purchase the south pasture," he said. "He's been wanting it for 3 years. Every few months he rides out and makes a new case for why I should sell." "And you won't?" "No." He paused. "That pasture runs the length of the best water source on this property. Without it, the ranch loses its independence from outside supply. He knows that. He's been buying up water rights across the valley for 2 years. Clara set down her pen. "If he gets the pasture," she said, "he controls your water." "And everyone else's," James said. "There are 4 smaller ranches that depend on the same water table. If Holloway owns the source, he sets the price. And he is not a man who sets prices charitably." She looked at him carefully. "He's not just interested in your land," she said. "He wants the position it gives him over everything around it." "That's right. And he'll keep coming back." "He will," James said. "He's patient. And he has the kind of money that lets a man be patient." She pulled her chair out and sat down with her elbows on the table. "Then we need to understand exactly what legal protections you have on that parcel," she said. "What's in the deed? Whether there are any encumbrances he could use to challenge the title." She looked up. "Do you have the original deed?" He stared at her. "You know land law," he said. "I know how to read documents," she said, "and I know how to find what's missing from them. My father lost an equipment dispute 3 years ago because he didn't read the contract carefully enough. I read every contract he signed after that." She folded her hands. "Get me the deed." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, he had stopped looking surprised by her in the 2nd week, but something else. Something she didn't have a word for yet. He went to the study and came back with a locked box, which he opened with a key on his watch chain, and he placed the deed on the table in front of her. She read it very carefully. He sat across from her and drank the rest of his coffee and watched her read, and she was aware of him watching in the same way she was aware of the lamp burning present ambient steady. "There's no encumbrance," she said after a while. "The title is clean, but there's a water rights addendum on page 4 that was written loosely enough that a determined lawyer could argue multiple interpretations." She pointed to the paragraph. "This language here, it says the water rights are attached to the primary use of the land. If Holloway could argue that the south pasture's primary use has changed, or that the water rights were intended to be separate from the land title, he'd have a basis for a challenge," James said. He had leaned forward to read the paragraph she was pointing to. They were very close to each other over the document. Neither of them moved back. "You need a lawyer to look at this," she said. "Someone who can tighten that language before Holloway finds the thread and starts pulling it." "There's a lawyer in Red Willow," he said. "Marcus Webb. He's done good work for the ranch before." "Go see him this week," she said. before Holloway has time to consult his own counsel." James was quiet for a moment. "You figured all that out in 15 minutes, he said. "I figured out the risk in 15 minutes, she said. "The solution will take longer." He looked at her across the document and the lamp and the necessary distance of the table, and the expression on his face was the one she least knew how to handle, not the controlled neutrality, not the careful consideration, but something unguarded and direct that appeared in the rare moments when he'd stopped managing what his face was doing. "Why are you doing this?" he said. "Because it needs to be done," she said. "And because what happens to this ranch affects the 4 smaller ranches around it, and I'd rather you keep the water than let Holloway have it." "That's not all of it," he said. She met his eyes. "No," she said. "It's not all of it." She looked back at the document. "Go see Marcus Webb," she said. He went. The week he spent riding back and forth to Red Willow for legal consultations was the first week Clara felt the ranch settle around her differently, as though the structure of her place in it had shifted without anyone making an announcement about it. May stopped explaining things she already knew. Rupert started leaving the feed inventory notes on her desk without being asked. The young hand Billy, who had previously addressed her with the traumatized formality of someone afraid of causing an incident, began asking her questions about the household schedule, with the easy directness of someone who had decided she was a reliable source of information. She had become part of the place. She was not sure when it had happened. These things rarely announced themselves. On the Thursday of that week, Billy came in from the east field at midday, looking rattled. "Mrs. Carter," he said, finding her in the kitchen. "There's men on the south fence line. 3 of them. Don't recognize 'em." Clara set down the jar she was holding. "Where's Rupert?" "North pasture with the others. And James is in town." She said more to herself than to Billy. She thought for a moment. "Go get Rupert," she said. Quietly. "Don't ride fast. I don't want to signal anything to those men before we know what they're doing." "Yes, ma'am." He paused. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to go look at the fence line," she said. "By yourself?" "No," she said. "You're going to come with me after you've told Rupert." She walked to the south fence line with the unhurried purpose of a woman who belonged there and was conducting routine business, because the fastest way to cause a situation is to approach one like you expected, and she did not want these men to know they'd been noticed until she understood what they were doing. What they were doing was taking measurements. The 3 men had a surveying instrument set up along the fence line, and they were recording numbers, and the particular area they were working in was precisely where the water rights addendum connected the south pasture to the creek that ran below the property line. Her stomach went cold. She stopped at the fence. "Afternoon," she said in the pleasant, neutral tone of a woman who is gathering information. The man nearest her turned. He was wearing clean clothes, too clean for this kind of outdoor work, which meant he'd dressed for it rather than been in the habit of it. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said. "We're just conducting a survey." "On Carter Ranch land," she said. "We're on the boundary line," he said. "Public surveying rights allow." "They allow you on the boundary," she said. "Your instrument is 8 feet inside the fence. That's not the boundary." The man looked at the instrument, then at her. "That must have shifted," he said. "I imagine it did," she said pleasantly. "I imagine it would be best for everyone if you shifted it back before my husband returns from town, since he's a considerably less patient person than I am about instrumentation on his land." The men exchanged a look. "We'll pack up," the nearest one said. "That's very sensible," Clara said. She stood at the fence until they did. Until they loaded the instrument into their wagon and drove away north, which was the direction of Holloway's property. Rupert arrived 20 minutes later, slightly out of breath. Billy said there were men. "They've gone," she said. "But Rupert, I need you to note down the exact position where their instrument was placed and write it out with today's date." She turned to him. "And when James gets back, tell him before you tell him anything else." Rupert looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating something. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Not the careful ma'am of the first week. This one was different. This one was the ma'am you give someone who has just done something you respect. When James came back that evening, she was the one who told him. She laid it out precisely. The three men, the surveying instrument, the position relative to the boundary, the direction they'd left. She gave him the note Rupert had written. She watched him read it. His expression went through three things in about 10 seconds, none of which was the controlled neutrality she was used to. "He sent surveyors onto my land," he said, quietly. "Onto your boundary," she said. "Technically, but 8 feet inside of it." "He's establishing a baseline," James said, "if he can claim the survey was conducted on disputed territory. He can argue the boundary itself is in question," she said, "which gives him a basis to challenge the water rights addendum from a different angle." He looked at her. "You already worked that out," he said. "On the ride back from the fence," she said. He set the note down and was quiet for a long moment. "I need to send a letter to Marcus tonight," he said. "I've already drafted it," she said. "It's on your desk. Read it and add anything I've missed." He went still. She watched him absorb this, the fact that she had anticipated the next step, had moved before he'd asked, had already put words on paper for a problem that had arrived in his absence, and that she had met without him. "Clara," he said. "It might need adjusting," she said. "I don't know all the legal particulars." "Clara," he said again. She looked at him. He had his hands at his sides, and his jaw was set, but his eyes were something she hadn't seen from him before, something undefended, something that cost him something to let show. "Thank you," he said. "That's not, I don't just mean for the letter." "I know," she said. Something stretched between them for a long moment. "Go read the letter," she said. "I'll get supper." He nodded. He walked to the study. At the kitchen table that evening, after May had retired, and the ranch had gone quiet, and it was just the two of them, and the lamp and the plates between them, James said, "My father left when I was 9. Clara set her fork down. "He didn't go because of anything that happened," James said. "He just went. The way some men do, I suppose. Just decided the life he had wasn't the life he wanted, and walked out of it without much ceremony." He was looking at the table. "My mother never said a word against him, not once, even when things were bad." He paused. "I used to think that was a weakness, her not saying it." Another pause. "I understand it now. It takes more strength to refuse to poison something that's already hurt you." Clara was very still. "She sounds like she was remarkable," she said. "She was the strongest person I've ever known," he said, "and I spent 30 years trying to be as strong as her and getting it wrong." He looked up. "She was strong because she chose what she cared about and she tended it. I was strong because I tried to need nothing. Those aren't the same thing." The lamp burned between them. "No," Clara said softly. "They're not. You remind me of her sometimes," he said, and then, as though the admission had surprised him coming out, "I don't say that lightly." She held his gaze. "James," she said. "I know," he said. I'm not saying anything I shouldn't." "I know you're not," she said. "I just wanted you to know that I'm listening." It was such a simple thing to say, and it landed on him the way simple true things sometimes land, like something that has been waited for without knowing it was being waited for. He nodded once. They finished eating in the quiet, and she cleared the plates, and he sat at the table with his coffee for a long time, after she'd gone to bed, turning something over in his mind that he didn't have a name for yet, but that had the particular shape and weight of something beginning. The next morning he was up before 6 as always. She heard him in the kitchen. She put on her robe and came out because something had shifted the night before, and she was not going to pretend it hadn't by sleeping late. He was at the window with his coffee facing east the way he always did. She went to the stove. "How do you take your coffee?" she said. He turned slightly surprised. She had been making his coffee for 4 weeks. She had always done it the same way, a small amount of sugar, no cream, because she had paid attention. "You know how I take it," he said. "I do," she said. "I wanted to ask anyway." He looked at her for a moment, with the look she had decided was his version of a smile, Not the expression itself, but the quality underneath it. Something that opened slightly at the edges when he was pleased about something and didn't want to make a performance of it. "1 sugar," he said. "No cream." "Good," she said. "That's what you're getting." She heard him exhale something that was almost a laugh. She handed him his cup. Their fingers touched on the handle. Neither of them said anything about it. But she was aware of it for the rest of the morning. That brief point of contact, the warmth of it, the way it sat in her chest like the smallest possible fire, barely there but present and not going out. She was not managing her circumstances anymore. She was in them. And the most frightening part, the part she lay awake with that night looking at the ceiling of the room that had slowly become her room, was that she was no longer sure she wanted to be anywhere else. She was not managing her circumstances anymore. That realization sat with her through the following days like a stone in a boot, present at every step, impossible to ignore, and entirely her own fault for not dealing with it sooner. She had made a promise to herself in the dark of her childhood bedroom the night her father's pen had dried on that paper, and the promise had been simple and absolute. Keep your heart behind a locked door and the key in your pocket. The problem was that she had apparently been leaving the door open, not all at once, not in any single dramatic moment she could point to and say that was where it happened. It had been the accumulated weight of small things. A hand wrapped in the kitchen. A covered dish left on an old man's porch without waiting to be seen. 11 nights of Dickens in a room where a woman was dying and her son sat beside her because sitting beside her was the only thing left to do. She was in trouble. She recognized it, the way you recognize a fever, not the moment it starts, but the moment you can no longer pretend you're fine. She went about her work with the focused precision of a woman who has decided that motion is the best available defense against feeling. And motion served her well enough through Monday and most of Tuesday. She reorganized the household pantry, revised the monthly supply schedule, wrote 3 letters for James to the lawyer Marcus Webb, and taught Billy how to read a feed ledger properly because he'd been making small errors in it for weeks, and correcting them quietly wasn't helping him learn. She was showing Billy the difference between a carryover entry and a running total when Rupert appeared in the barn doorway with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. "There's a woman here," he said, "asking for Mr. Carter." "He's in the north field," Clara said. "What does she need?" Rupert's jaw worked for a moment in the way of a man choosing words carefully. "She says she's an old acquaintance, from before." Clara set the ledger down. The woman waiting at the front of the house was perhaps 35, and she was the kind of beautiful that announces itself without effort, dark-haired, composed, wearing the kind of traveling clothes that cost real money without looking like they were trying to. She had the particular stillness of someone who was accustomed to rooms adjusting themselves around her arrival. She looked at Clara with an expression that Clara could not quite classify. "You must be the new wife," the woman said. "I'm Clara Carter," Clara said. "And you are Vivian Hale." She said it the way people say names they expect to be recognized. "James and I were close, some years back." A pause, delicate and deliberate. "I heard he'd married. I wanted to see it for myself." "How thoughtful," Clara said. Vivian's mouth curved slightly. "I'm passing through to Billings. I won't stay long." She tilted her head. "He never mentioned me." "He doesn't discuss his past," Clara said. "Neither do I." "Of course." The curve deepened. "I'm sure he married you for very practical reasons. James was always practical." Clara held her gaze for a moment. "Would you like coffee?" she said, "while you wait?" It was not warmth. It was the particular courtesy of a woman who knows that the most powerful response to a provocation is perfect composure, and who will absolutely be examining that composure later in the privacy of her own room and deciding what it cost her. She brought coffee. Vivian sat in the front room and looked around at the house with the specific attention of someone cataloging differences from what they remembered. "It's changed," Vivian said. "Tidier. Warmer." She glanced at Clara. "That would be you, I imagine." "I manage the household," Clara said. "He let you." Vivian said. He didn't let anyone. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. I spent 18 months trying to get James Carter to let me into his life. He was kind to me. He was decent to me. And he held me at exactly the length he decided was appropriate and never moved an inch. She looked up. Whatever you've done differently, it's working. Clara said nothing. I'm not here to cause trouble, Vivian said. I want you to know that. I'm here because... She stopped. Something moved through her expression. Because I wasted 18 months on a man I thought I could reach, and when I finally gave up, he didn't even ask me to stay. I want to see what it looks like when it's working, if that makes any sense. Against her own better intentions, Clara felt something loosen slightly. It makes some sense, she said. They heard James's step on the porch before the door opened, and Clara watched his face with the specific attention she'd developed over 5 weeks of reading him the moment of recognition. The stillness, the deliberate composure that replaced whatever had been there before. Vivian, he said. James. She stood. Passing through. Wanted to say hello. Hello, he said. Even. Careful. Your wife gave me coffee, Vivian said. She's remarkable, by the way. I'm saying that as a woman who would know. James looked at Clara. Clara looked at the wall. Vivian left within the hour, riding north toward Billings with the elegant self-possession of a woman who has made peace with a particular chapter of her life. From the doorway, Clara watched the horse disappear up the road. James stood beside her. I should have told you about her, he said. You don't owe me your history, Clara said. No, he said, but you handled that with more grace than the situation deserved, and you should know I'm aware of that. She turned and looked at him directly. Were you in love with her? She asked. A pause. I thought I might be, he said. For a while, but I kept her at a distance, and eventually she stopped trying to close it, and when she left, I realized I was relieved more than I was sad. He paused. That told me something about what it actually was. What did it tell you? That I was more comfortable with the idea of her than with her, he said. That I'd rather keep people far enough away that they couldn't see anything I wasn't ready to show. He looked at her steadily. I've noticed it's harder to do that with you. The air between them changed. James. I'm not asking anything, he said. I just wanted you to know. He walked back inside. She stood on the porch for a long moment, her hand on the doorframe, her jaw tight, her heart doing something entirely against her instructions. She went back inside. She did not address what he'd said directly, and neither did he, because they were apparently two people who communicated best in the careful language of action and adjacency rather than declaration. And that evening, they sat in the study with the lamp between them and the account books and the draft letter to Marcus Webb, and nothing was said about any of it, and everything was entirely present. The storm arrived on a Wednesday. It had been building for 2 days, in the particular way of Montana autumn storms. A drop in pressure. A specific heaviness in the air. Horses growing restless in a way that experienced ranchers read as clearly as a newspaper. James had spent Monday and Tuesday tightening everything that needed tightening, checking everything that needed checking, and on Wednesday morning he looked at the sky at 5:30 and told Rupert to get everyone inside by noon. By 9 o'clock the wind had already started. By 11 it was a serious situation. By 1 in the afternoon, when James had not come back in and the sky had gone the color of a bruise and the wind was doing damage, Clara could hear from inside the walls of the house she put on her coat. May came into the kitchen and found her at the door. You're not going out there, May said. I am, Clara said. Mr. Carter said everyone inside. Then he should have come inside himself, Clara said, and she opened the door. The storm hit her like a wall. The wind was not the kind you lean into and manage. It was the kind that makes decisions for you, that takes your direction and replaces it with its own. She bent her head and walked. She knew the property well enough by now to navigate it without seeing it. That was 5 weeks of paying attention, and right now those 5 weeks were the only map she had. She found Rupert at the fence line of the east pasture shouting something she couldn't hear. She grabbed his arm. "James!" She got out between gusts. "South pasture!" he shouted back. "The cattle broke through." Her stomach dropped. The south pasture. The parcel that Holloway wanted. The fence line along the creek. She grabbed Rupert's arm harder. "How long?" 30 minutes. He shook his head. He went after them alone. She let go and moved toward the south pasture. Rupert came after her, and she didn't stop him, and together they went into the worst of the wind, heads down, moving by instinct and accumulated knowledge of a piece of land that Clara had been studying since the day she arrived. She found him not far from the creek. He was on the ground beside his horse, and the horse was standing over him in a way that horses sometimes do when they've decided to protect something, which was the detail that hit Clara's chest the hardest, that the animal was shielding him. She dropped beside him. "James?" She put her hands on him. "Where are you hurt?" "I'm fine," he said. "You're on the ground." "The horse slipped on the creek bank," he said, trying to sit up. "She went down. I went with her." Clara ran her hands over him with the efficient thoroughness of someone who has watched enough ranch injuries to know where they hide. His left side, he winced before she found it. "Ribs," she said. "One maybe," he said. "I've had worse." "That is not the comfort you think it is," she said sharply. His head came up. She had his face in her hands before she realized she'd moved. Both palms against his jaw, turning him toward her, checking his eyes in the half-darkness of the storm for the wrong kind of vacancy. He was looking at her. Really looking at her in the way he had stopped trying to hide. "I'm all right, Clara," he said. "I know," she said. She did not move her hands. The wind tore around them, and the horse stood above them both, and the creek was loud in the dark, and Clara was kneeling in the mud of the south pasture, with her hands on James Carter's face, and she was aware with the specific terrible clarity of a woman whose locked door had not just opened, but come entirely off its hinges, that she was frightened in a way that had nothing to do with the storm. She was frightened because he was hurt, and the fear was not general, not the fear you'd have for any person in trouble. It was specific and sharp and pointed directly at him, and that kind of specificity only comes from one place. She helped him up. He was heavier than she expected, and she was smaller than either of them typically acknowledged, and it took both of them, and the fence post, and the horse's steady patience, to get him upright and moving. He kept one hand on her shoulder, and she kept one arm around his side, away from the ribs, and they moved through the storm together, and she talked to him the whole way. Not about anything important, just words, steady and continuous, something for him to follow through the wind. When they got back to the house and May took over with the competent fury of a woman who has been waiting to do something useful for 2 hours. Clara stood in the kitchen doorway with her coat still on and the storm still tearing outside, and let the shake move through her from her hands to her knees. She had been holding it together for the walk back. She let it go now. Rupert appeared beside her. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, which was more than enough. "He's going to be fine," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Rupert said. "I know he's going to be fine," she said. "I know that." "Yes, ma'am," Rupert said again, steady as ever. She pressed her lips together. "The cattle," she said. "Billy and Hector got the last of them about 10 minutes after you went after Mr. Carter," Rupert said. "Everybody's accounted for." She nodded. She went upstairs and changed out of her wet clothes and came back down and sat at the kitchen table, and when May brought her coffee she wrapped her hands around it and breathed, and told herself the shake was just cold. She almost believed it. James was on the settee in the front room, ribs wrapped by May with the practiced efficiency of a woman who'd done it more than once. He'd refused to go upstairs, which Clara chose not to fight, because she had already spent her willingness to argue with him for the evening. She came and sat in the chair across from him. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You scared me," she said. "Clara, I'm not finished," she said. "You scared me, and I'm telling you that because I decided some time ago that I wasn't going to pretend things were less than they were, and this isn't less than it is." She kept her voice even. "So, you scared me." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be sorry," she said. "Just tell me next time. Tell me before you go somewhere dangerous in a storm. Not because I'd stop you. I know better than to try to stop you, but because then I'd know where to look." Something crossed his face that she had no word for. "All right," he said. "Good," she said. She got up and tucked the blanket May had left at the end of the settee over his legs because she was a practical woman, and the room was getting cold, and someone had to do it, and she absolutely was not doing it for any other reason. His hand caught her wrist, gently, not pulling, just present. She looked down at his hand, then at him. "Clara," he said. His voice was different, stripped of the management, the careful control, just his voice reaching her directly. "I need to say something. James, I've been trying not to," he said. "Because I know what this was when it started. I know you didn't choose this the way a person chooses something they want. And I don't want to—" He stopped, tried again. "I don't want to be another thing you're obligated to manage." She sat on the edge of the settee. "You're not," she said. "I'm aware that's what I am technically," he said. "On paper. The man you married because the alternative was watching your family lose everything. That's what you were," she said. "On paper, on the first day." She looked at him steadily. "You're not that anymore." His jaw tightened. "What am I then?" he said. Quiet, serious. She thought about Rupert and his 14 years. She thought about Vivian Hale and 18 months of a door held at exactly the right distance. She thought about 11 nights of Dickens and a covered dish on an old man's porch in the dark, and a calf breathing easier because he'd stayed with her until she did. "You're someone worth staying for," she said. The silence that followed was not empty. It was one of the fullest silences she had ever sat inside. He turned her hand over in his, very carefully, the way you handle something you're afraid of damaging, and he held it. She let him. She was done with the locked door. The door was gone. She had left it somewhere in the mud of the south pasture, and she had no intention of going back for it. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Neither do I," she said. "That's not reassuring," he said. "No," she said. "But it's honest." Something moved through his expression, that thing she'd been calling almost a smile all these weeks, and this time it came all the way through. Not dramatic, not wide, just real, the way real things tend to be, quiet, unannounced, and completely unmistakable. She was still sitting beside him when the storm outside began to ease, the wind dropping in increments, the world going slowly quieter around them. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. What neither of them knew what was sitting in the darkness, outside the warmth of that room, like a different kind of storm entirely, was that Holloway had been watching. Not him personally. He had men for watching. And his men had seen a lot over the past several weeks. They had seen the lawyer's visits. They had seen Clara at the fence line sending surveyors home. They had seen the way the ranch, which had been a solitary operation run by one implacable man, had become something harder to predict, a partnership with two sets of eyes instead of one, and a woman who clearly knew how to read a document and was not afraid to act on what she found in it. Holloway was a patient man, as James had said, but he was also a strategic one. He had tried the direct offer. He had tried the survey gambit. Both had been deflected with a speed he hadn't anticipated. So he would try something else. The letter arrived on Friday morning, not to James, to Clara. It was delivered by a writer she didn't recognize, who left it without waiting for a response, which was itself a signal. She filed away immediately. The envelope was fine paper. The handwriting was deliberate and neat. Inside the letter was 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph expressed regret at the rumors circulating in Red Willow regarding the circumstances of her marriage. The nature of the debt, the question of whether she had been coerced, the concern among various community members for her well-being and freedom of choice. The second paragraph informed her that should she find herself in a position where she wished to leave Carter Ranch, certain parties were prepared to ensure she had the resources to do so comfortably and without obligation. It was signed R. Holloway. She read it twice. She set it on the kitchen table. She stood with her hands flat on the surface for about 30 seconds. Then she took the ladder and walked directly to the study where James was reviewing the correspondence from Marcus Webb, and she placed it in front of him without a word. She watched him read it. She watched the stillness that was not calm descend over him, the specific quality of controlled anger that she now knew well enough to distinguish from genuine peace. He set the letter down. "He's trying to use you," James said. His voice was very even. "If he can establish that you were coerced, if he can get even one credible account into a legal proceeding, claiming this marriage was not voluntary. He can argue you obtained the ranch's water rights through fraudulent means," Clara said. "If the marriage is contested, so is every legal agreement attached to it, including the deed registration we filed 3 weeks ago," James said. "The water rights addendum, the very thing they'd spent 2 weeks shoring up with Marcus Webb." Clara sat down. "He's not actually interested in me," she said. "No," James said. "He's interested in what challenging the legitimacy of our marriage would do to the land title. So we need to ensure the marriage is unimpeachable," she said. A pause. "In the eyes of the town," James said. "In court if it comes to that." She thought about it. She thought about the women at the dry goods store and their careful searching expressions. She thought about the whispers she'd heard in Red Willow, the words like transaction and debt and poor Clara. She thought about how the story looked from the outside, how it had always looked from the outside, like a woman sold to pay a farm's debts. She thought about how none of that was the truth, and how the truth was not something she could let Holloway weaponize. "We need to go to town," she said. "Together. And we need to let people see us." "Clara." "Not to perform something that isn't real," she said. "Just to let them see what is." She met his eyes. "Unless you think there's nothing there to see." He held her gaze. "You know better than that," he said. "Then let's go to Red Willow," she said. "And let's give Holloway nothing to work with." But that was before the second letter arrived. This one was not to Clara. It was to the Red Willow Town Council, copied to the Territorial Court in Helena, and it arrived the following Monday. Rupert brought it back from town with the particular speed of someone carrying information that couldn't wait. He handed it to James. James read it. His face did the thing she had only seen once, the complete absence of any management at all. He handed it to her. The letter alleged that Clara Whitmore had been coerced into marriage through financial manipulation. It cited witnesses unnamed, but described as residents of Red Willow, who were prepared to testify that Clara had been seen arriving at Carter Ranch in distress, that she had expressed reluctance to proceed with the marriage, and that the debt arrangement constituted a form of legal coercion under territorial law. It requested a formal inquiry. It was signed by Holloway's lawyer. Clara read it once. She set it down. She was quiet for a moment that cost her something. "He has witnesses," she said. "Alleged witnesses," James said. "People he's paid," she said. "Or persuaded. Or both." She pressed her palms flat on the desk the same way she had with his letter. "He's building a case. Not because he actually believes I was coerced. Because he needs a legal lever, and this is the most available one." James was watching her. "If this goes to a formal inquiry," he said carefully, "you'll be asked to give testimony in front of the council, possibly in Helena." She looked up at him. "I know," she said. "Clara." His voice was very low. "You can say whatever is true. If any part of this—" "James." She cut him off. Not roughly, but clearly. "Don't." "I mean it," he said. "If there's any part of this that—" "There isn't," she said. She held his gaze and let him see the truth of it. The whole truth, the version that had taken 5 weeks and a storm and a man on a creek bank to arrive at. "I know exactly what this marriage is, and I know exactly what I want to say about it." He was very still. "What do you want to say about it?" he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "I want to say that I chose it," she said. "I want to say that I was given the choice, and I made it, and I would make it again." She paused. I want to say that the man everyone in this town has spent years deciding they don't know him. And I do. And I intend to make sure that counts for something." His jaw worked. "You don't have to do this for the ranch," he said. "I'm not doing it for the ranch," she said. The silence after that was the loudest thing in the room. Outside, Red Willow was already talking. Word moved fast in a town that small, and the arrival of a letter to the council was not the kind of thing that stayed private. By Tuesday, Clara had heard 3 different versions of it from 3 different people who came to the ranch with various pretexts and actual agendas. By Wednesday, she had a plan. It wasn't James's kind of plan. He operated in straight lines, problem, solution, action. Her plan was the kind that required reading a room and knowing which threads to pull, and understanding that sometimes the most powerful move available is simply standing in a public place and refusing to be the version of yourself that other people have decided you are. She was going to the town council meeting on Friday, and she was going to stand up, and she was going to say every true thing she had. What she didn't know yet, what no one knew yet except Holloway and the man he'd paid to produce it, was the document sitting in a lawyer's office in Helena. A document with her father's signature on it. A document that, if taken at face value, appeared to confirm everything Holloway had alleged. A document her father had not signed. The storm outside had ended. A different kind was just beginning. She had 3 days before the council meeting, and she used every hour of them. The plan had a shape in her mind. Clear, sequential, the way plans always were when you'd been raised to solve problems with the resources you actually had rather than the ones you wished for. She needed to know what Holloway had. She needed to understand the document before it was used against them. And she needed to do both of those things without alerting Holloway that she was moving, because the one advantage a smaller opponent has over a larger one is the element of surprise, and she intended to keep it. She sent a letter to Marcus Webb that same Wednesday evening, delivered by Rupert, writing fast, asking him to make discreet inquiry about any documents recently filed or registered in Helena bearing her father's name. She did not explain why. Marcus was a careful man. He would understand that the absence of explanation was itself information. She wrote a second letter to her father. This one was harder. She sat at the desk in the study for 20 minutes with a blank page in front of her before she wrote a single word, because there was a version of this letter she wanted to write, the true version, the one that said, "I need to know if you signed something you shouldn't have, and I need to know it without asking you directly, because if I ask you directly, you'll either lie to protect yourself or tell the truth and collapse under the weight of it, and neither of those outcomes serves anyone." And then there was the version she could actually send, which communicated the same thing in language a frightened man could act on without feeling accused. She wrote the second version. She was sealing it when James appeared in the doorway. "It's past midnight," he said. "I know," she said. He came in. He had been going to bed, she could tell by the absence of the usual layering of work clothes, the rolled sleeves, the specific posture of a man who still has 12 things to do. He looked at the letters on the desk. "What are you doing?" he said. "I'm trying to understand what Holloway has before Friday," she said. "If there's a document bearing my father's signature, it came from somewhere, and I need to know if my father produced it voluntarily or if someone produced it for him." James sat down in the chair across the desk. "You think it's forged," he said. "I think my father is a frightened man who made a desperate decision to save his farm," she said. "And I think Holloway has people who are very good at identifying frightened men and finding out what they'll do under pressure." She looked at James directly. "Either my father signed something he shouldn't have, which I need to know about, or someone signed it for him. Both of those things have different remedies, and I need to know which one I'm dealing with." James was quiet for a moment. "I'll ride to your family's farm tomorrow morning," he said. She shook her head. "No," she said. "If Holloway is watching the ranch, and I believe he is, he'll see you go, and he'll send someone to my father before you get there. My father will panic and say whatever keeps him out of trouble, and then we won't know what's true." James looked at her steadily. "Then what?" "I'll go," she said. "Alone. Early. before anyone riding from Holloway's property could get there first. "Clara, I know that road better than anyone," she said. "I grew up on it. And my father will talk to me in a way he won't talk to you, because whatever has happened between us, I am still his daughter, and he knows he cannot lie to me and have me believe it." James put his hand flat on the desk. "I don't like it," he said. "You don't have to like it," she said. "You just have to trust me." The word landed between them. Trust. She had not used it before, not directly. Not like that as a thing she was asking him to extend as a thing between them that had weight and consequence. He looked at her for a long moment. "Take Rupert's horse," he said. "She's faster than yours. And leave before 5. "Before 4, she said. He nodded once. She left before 4. The road to her family's farm was an hour at pace, and she rode it in the dark with the specific, purposeful calm of a woman who has made her decision and is on the other side of fear. The sky was doing something gray and early in the east. The land was cold and quiet. She arrived as her mother was lighting the kitchen lamp. Her mother opened the door and stood in the frame and looked at Clara on the horse in the pre-dawn dark, and her face went through 3 things very quickly. "Clara," she said. "What's happened?" "I need to talk to Papa," Clara said. "Now, before he goes to the field." Her father was already at the table when she came in. He always woke early, the habit of a farming man up before the sun, to lie in the dark and worry about the same things he'd been worrying about for years. He looked at her face, and his own went the color of old ash. "What did you do?" she said. She had decided on the ride over that she did not have time for indirect approach. The indirect letter was for Holloway's benefit, for misdirection to keep the timeline vague. With her father, she needed the truth, and she needed it in the next 10 minutes. Her father's hands went flat on the table. "A man came," he said. "When?" 3 weeks ago. His voice was very low. "He said he was from the territorial court. He had papers. He said there was a question about the debt repayment, whether it had been properly documented. He said I needed to sign an affidavit confirming the circumstances of the arrangement." Clara's chest went cold. "What kind of affidavit?" she said. "Just confirming the debt existed," he said. "Confirming the amount. Confirming—" He stopped. "Papa," she said. "What else did it say?" His jaw worked. "It asked me to confirm that you felt you had no other option." His voice broke on the last words. "Clara, I swear to God I didn't know what it was for. He said it was to protect you. He said the court needed to establish that the marriage was entered under duress so your rights could be— He told you it was to protect me," she said. "Yes." She pressed her lips together so tightly she could feel them whiten. "And you signed it," she said. Her father looked at her with the eyes of a man who has known for 3 weeks that he has done something he cannot undo and has been living in the particular hell of that knowledge every single day. "I signed it," he said. The silence in that kitchen was the heaviest thing Clara had ever sat inside. Her mother was at the wall, very still, not turning around. Clara breathed in, out. "The man who came to you," she said. "Describe him." 40 maybe, clean clothes. He had, her father thought, he had a ring, a signet ring, gold with some kind of mark on it. "Did he give you a name?" "Doyle," her father said. "He said his name was Doyle." Clara stood up. "Did he give you a copy of what you signed?" Her father reached into his coat, which was hanging on the chair beside him, and pulled out a folded paper. His hands were shaking. She took it. She read it. It was not an affidavit from the territorial court. It was a sworn statement, informal, but structured to look official, claiming that Arthur Whitmore had witnessed his daughter express unwillingness to enter the marriage with James Carter, and had felt compelled to accept the arrangement due to financial coercion. It was dated 6 weeks ago. The date was a lie. 6 weeks ago, Clara had been on Carter Ranch for barely 1 week. Her father had not known what he was signing. Or, and this was the thing she had to be honest about, he had known enough to suspect and had let himself believe the more comfortable interpretation, because the more comfortable interpretation meant he was helping her, and not hurting her, and some men will take that bargain even when the evidence against it is sitting right in front of them. She folded the paper. "I'm taking this," she said. "Clara." "Papa?" She looked at him. Not with anger, she had moved past anger somewhere on the dark road over, because anger required energy. She didn't have to spare, and it would not get her what she needed. "I need you to listen to me very carefully." She kept her voice even. "This document was obtained by Richard Holloway's man for the purpose of challenging my marriage and taking James's land. It is not a court document. It is not protecting me. It is being used to destroy something that I—" She stopped for just a moment. "Something that matters to me." Her father's face crumpled. "I didn't know," he said. "Clara, I swear I didn't." "I know you didn't," she said. "But I need you to come to Red Willow on Friday and say exactly that, in front of the council. I need you to stand up and tell them what this man told you and what you signed and why." He looked at her. "You want me to—" "I want you to tell the truth," she said. "That's all. Just the truth." Her father was quiet for a long moment. Then he straightened in his chair. She watched it happen, the particular gathering of a man who has been folded under shame for 3 weeks and is being offered the chance to unfold. "Friday," he said. "Friday," she said. She rode back to Carter Ranch with the document folded in her coat, and the cold morning coming up around her, and something that wasn't quite relief but was in the same territory. The specific feeling of a piece falling into place, which was satisfying in itself, regardless of what was still missing. James was in the yard when she came back. He had not gone to the north field. He was waiting. She dismounted and handed him the paper without speaking. He read it. When he looked up, his expression was the controlled fury she had seen once before, the absolute absence of management, everything present. "He had someone go to your father," he said. "A man named Doyle," she said. "He told my father he was from the territorial court, that it was to protect me. Your father believed him." "My father wanted to believe him," she said. "That's not the same thing, but it's close enough that we have to work with it." She took the paper back. "The date on this is wrong. It says 6 weeks ago, but the details reference things that only happened after I arrived here. If Marcus Webb can establish the timeline, this document falls apart." James looked at her. "You worked all that out on the ride home," he said. "I worked most of it out on the ride there," she said. The ride home was for confirming. Something moved across his face, that particular expression she had collected over 5 weeks, like pressed flowers, each one catalogued and kept. "Come inside," he said. "You need coffee, and you need to sit down, and you need to tell me everything." She followed him inside. May took one look at her and started the coffee without being asked. Clara sat at the kitchen table and laid out everything she knew, the document, the date discrepancy, her father's account of Doyle, the signet ring, the direction of the approach. James sat across from her and listened the way he always listened, without interrupting, without performing attention, just genuinely present with what she was telling him. When she finished, he said, "Marcus can pull the court registry. If Doyle was acting as a court representative, there'll be a record. If there's no record, then he was impersonating one," she said, "which is a crime." "Which changes the entire nature of Friday's council meeting," James said. "Holloway walked into this thinking he had a document that corroborates coercion," Clara said. "What he actually has is evidence of fraud, his own fraud." A silence. Then James said very quietly, "He miscalculated. He underestimated my father's willingness to show up when it counts," she said. "And he underestimated me." James looked at her across the table for a long moment. "Most people do," he said. The next day, Marcus Webb came to the ranch. He was a compact, precise man of about 55, with the specific quality of a lawyer who had spent decades in frontier territory, practical, unruffled, and entirely unimpressed by anyone who tried to intimidate him, which Clara had verified in their earlier consultations and found deeply reassuring. He read the document. He read it again. "The date is wrong," he said. I know, Clara said. It's not subtle, he said. Whoever drafted this wasn't expecting it to be scrutinized by someone who knew the actual timeline. He set it down. The description of the marital household, the kitchen with the east window, that's a specific detail. Did your father visit the ranch before the document was dated? No, Clara said. He's never been here. Marcus looked at her over the paper. Then someone described it to him, he said. Or to Doyle. Someone who had been here. The room went very still. Clara looked at James. James's expression shifted through something slow and deliberate. Who has been on this ranch in the last 6 weeks that shouldn't have been? He said. It was not quite a question. The surveyors, Clara said. They were inside the fence line. They could have seen the house. They weren't inside long enough to observe interior details, James said. Clara thought. She thought about the week James had been riding to Red Willow for legal consultations, the days she had been largely alone with the household staff. Was anyone in the house during that week? She said. Anyone unfamiliar? May, who had been standing quietly at the kitchen doorway, said, There was a man. Everyone turned. May's expression was the particular one of a woman who has been waiting for the right moment to say something she has been turning over for several weeks. He came to the back door, May said. Tuesday of that week. Said he was delivering a package from town. I took the package. He waited on the step while I checked it. She paused. He was on the step for about 5 minutes. The door to the kitchen was open. You could see the east window from the step. Silence. What did he look like? Clara said. About 40, May said. Clean clothes for a delivery man. Had a ring. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Gold, she said. With a mark on it. Yes, May said. How did you? Because my father described the same man, Clara said. His name is Doyle. James stood up. I need to speak to Marcus alone, he said. Clara looked at him. James, 5 minutes, he said. Please. She went to the front room and stood with her arms crossed and her jaw tight and counted the minutes, the way you count minutes when you know something is being decided in a room you're not in. Which is one of the most frustrating experiences available to a woman who is accustomed to being in every room where things are decided. She made it to 4 minutes before she went back. Both men looked at her. I'm not waiting in the front room, she said. Whatever you're deciding involves me directly, and I'll be here for it. Marcus looked at James. James looked at Clara. I was going to ask Marcus, James said carefully, whether we have enough to counterfile a complaint against Holloway for fraud and impersonation of a court officer. Clara looked at Marcus. Do we? She said. Marcus folded his hands. With the document, the date discrepancy, the father's testimony, and May's account of Doyle's presence here. Yes, he said. It's not airtight, but it's substantial. The question is whether you want to go that direction or whether you want to use what you have defensively on Friday and let Holloway's case collapse under its own weight. What's the difference? James said. Defensive, you survive Friday. Holloway retreats, you keep the land, the marriage stands unchallenged. He loses this round, but tries again later. Marcus paused. Offensive, you file the counter-complaint, you force the inquiry into his conduct, you create a legal record that makes it significantly harder for him to try again. But it's public. It's loud. It involves the territorial court in Helena, and it requires your father to testify under oath. He looked at Clara on the last sentence. She looked at her hands. She thought about her father at that table at 4 a.m. His voice breaking on the words, the paper shaking in his grip. She thought about what it would cost him to stand in a courtroom and say under oath that he had been manipulated, that a man had come to his door and told him a lie, and he had signed his name to it because he wanted to believe it was protecting someone he'd already failed once. She thought about what it would mean to her father to stand up anyway. He'll do it, she said. James looked at her. You're sure? He said. He straightened up when I asked him, she said. He's been carrying this for 3 weeks. carrying it alone. She looked at Marcus. What my father needs is the chance to make this right. That's what Friday gives him. She set her jaw. We go offensive. Marcus nodded once, as though this was the answer he had expected, but hadn't wanted to presume. Then I have a great deal of work to do before Friday, he said, and he stood and picked up his hat. The day before the council meeting, Holloway made his last move. It arrived in the form of a second rider. Not Doyle. This time someone else, someone she didn't recognize, who came to the front gate in the late afternoon and asked to speak to Mrs. Carter. She went out. The rider handed her a letter and left without speaking. Inside the envelope was a single page, Holloway's handwriting. She recognized it from the first letter. It said, I am aware that you intend to appear at Friday's council meeting. I want to offer you a final opportunity to consider the full picture before you do. Your father is a man of limited legal sophistication who signed a document under incomplete information. If this matter proceeds to formal inquiry, his role in producing that document will be scrutinized. I have no interest in seeing an old farmer prosecuted. But I cannot guarantee the outcome if you force this to a public proceeding. Consider what Friday will cost your family before you decide to attend. She read it twice. She went inside. James was in the kitchen. She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it. His expression went through the same slow, controlled fury as before. But this time, there was something else underneath it, something protective and particular. He's threatening your father, James said. He's reminding me that my father can be used as a pressure point, she said. He thinks I'll stand down to protect him. Will you? James said. She looked at him. My father signed that document because a man convinced him it was protecting me, she said. And Holloway is now threatening to use that against him to protect himself. She set her hands flat on the kitchen table. If I stand down, Holloway gets the water rights, 4 ranches lose their independence, and my father learns that his mistake cannot be fixed, that the only thing left to do is live with it. She looked up at James. If I stand up, my father gets to be part of fixing it. He gets to be the man who told the truth when it mattered. She paused. I am not going to take that from him. James held her gaze. Then he crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and put his arms around her, and held her, and it was not a complicated thing. It was simply the most direct available expression of everything that had been building for 5 weeks. The specific warmth of a man who had spent his whole life protecting others, and had just understood that someone was choosing to stand in the same place. He stood, for reasons that had nothing to do with obligation, and everything to do with who she was. She held on. After a moment, he said against her hair, You are the strongest person I have ever known. Don't, she said. I'm terrified. I know, he said. That's why it's true. She laughed, and it surprised her, a real laugh, not the careful kind, and it made something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was still locked. She stepped back and looked at him. We need to make sure my father gets to Red Willow safely, she said. I don't trust Holloway's restraint once he realizes I'm not standing down. Rupert will ride to your family's farm tonight, James said immediately. He'll stay with them and bring them in the morning. And Marcus needs to know about this letter, she said. The threat itself is evidence. I'll send Billy to Marcus tonight, he said. She nodded. She moved to the desk to write the note for Billy to carry. James watched her for a moment. Clara, he said. She looked up. After Friday, he said. When this is done. He stopped, tried again. I want to say something to you that isn't about legal strategy or land deeds or Richard Holloway. I know, she said softly. I want to say it properly, he said, when there isn't a crisis attached to it. Then you'll say it on Saturday, she said. He looked at her. Saturday. He agreed. She looked back down at the paper and wrote the note for Billy and told herself that Saturday was only 2 days away and she had a council meeting to get through first, and she was absolutely not going to think about what he wanted to say, because if she thought about it now, she would not be able to think about anything else. She thought about it the entire time she was writing. Friday morning came in cold and clear. Rupert arrived back from the Whitmore farm with her father and mother and both younger siblings at 9 o'clock, which was earlier than she'd asked, and told her that her father had been ready before Rupert got there. He had dressed in his church clothes. He had shaved. He had the look of a man who had spent 3 weeks in a particular kind of prison and had been handed the key and intended to use it. "Papa," Clara said when he climbed down from the wagon. He looked at her. "I'm going to say every word of it," he said. "You don't have to worry." She put her hand on his arm. "I know," she said. They rode to Red Willow together, James and Clara, in front her parents and siblings, behind Rupert and Billy, flanking Marcus Webb, already waiting at the council hall when they arrived. The street outside was fuller than a regular Friday morning, which told her the news had spread, in the way news always spread, in a small town, in approximately 48 hours and with considerable elaboration along the way. She saw faces she recognized. The women from the dry goods store, Harriet Boone, the postmistress, standing outside the hall with her arms folded and an expression that was not quite neutral. People who had been in Red Willow her whole life, who had watched her family struggle, who had been present for every version of the story being told about her marriage. She held her head level. James stepped down from the horse first and came around to her side before she could move. He held out his hand. Not as assistance, as declaration, as the specific and deliberate act of a man who understood exactly what a public gesture meant in a town this size, and was making it anyway, eyes open, no ambiguity. She took his hand. They walked into the council hall together. Holloway was already inside. He was seated near the front, flanked by 2 men she didn't recognize, lawyers from Helena, she guessed from the quality of their clothing, and the particular self-assurance of people who had traveled specifically to be the most qualified person in a room. He looked up when they entered, and his expression moved through a quick sequence of things before settling back into the confident composure of a man who believed his position was secure. He had not expected her father. She watched him register Arthur Whitmore's presence. She watched the composure recalibrate something tightening underneath it. Good, she thought. The council chairman, a man named Gerald Fitch, who was approximately 60 years old, and had the expression of a man who would very much have preferred not to be involved in any of this, called the meeting to order, with the specific reluctance of someone who knows that what is about to happen in his hall is larger than what his hall was designed to contain. "We're here to consider a formal complaint regarding the circumstances of the Carter marriage," Fitch said. "Mr. Holloway's counsel has submitted documentation for review, and I understand there is also a counter-filing," Marcus said from his position beside James and Clara, "on behalf of James and Clara Carter, alleging fraud impersonation of a court officer and coercion." The hall did not go quiet, so much as it went very specifically attentive, in the way that rooms do when the temperature of a situation suddenly shifts. Holloway's lead lawyer stood. "The counter-filing is supported by documentation, witness testimony, and physical evidence," Marcus said pleasantly. "I look forward to presenting it." Fitch looked between the 2 lawyers, the way a man looks when he has realized this is going to take a while. "Very well," Fitch said. "We'll hear both sides. Mr. Holloway's counsel first." The lawyers from Helena were good. She would give Holloway that he had not cut corners on representation. They presented the affidavit, described its contents, outlined the allegation of financial coercion, and framed the entire arrangement between the Whitmore family and James Carter, with the language of exploitation. Careful language, measured language, the kind that is designed to seem moderate while drawing blood. They did not call the document into question because they did not know she had identified the date discrepancy. When they finished, Fitch said, "Mr. Webb." Marcus stood. He presented the date discrepancy, first clean, factual, irrefutable. The document was dated 6 weeks prior. The interior detail it contained, the east-facing kitchen window, was information that could only have been gathered after Clara was in residence. Her father had never visited the ranch. The timeline was impossible. A murmur moved through the hall. Then he called Arthur Whitmore. Her father walked to the front of the hall in his church clothes and stood with his hands at his sides and his jaw set, and he told the truth. All of it. The man named Doyle. The ring. The claim that he was from the territorial court. The document he'd been told was protecting his daughter. The signature he'd given because he was a frightened man who had already failed his family once and would have signed anything that let him believe he was fixing it. His voice broke twice. He kept going both times. When he finished, the hall was entirely silent. Holloway's lawyer stood to cross-examine, and her father answered every question with the flat, exhausted honesty of a man who has already given everything and has nothing left to protect. Then Marcus called May. May described Doyle's visit to the ranch, the back door, the step, the east window visible from the step, the ring. Then Clara stood up. She had not been called. She stood up because there was something that needed to be said that was not in any of the documents, and could not be introduced as evidence, and had to be spoken by a living person in a room full of living people who had been carrying the wrong version of this story. Fitch looked at her. "Mrs. Carter," he said. "I'd like to speak," she said. A pause. "This is irregular," Holloway's lawyer said. "Let her speak," said a voice from the back of the hall. Clara did not look to see who it was. She looked at Gerald Fitch. After a moment he nodded. She turned to face the room. She had rehearsed this. She had not rehearsed this. Both things were true, which is usually how it goes with the things that matter most. "My name is Clara Carter," she said. 6 weeks ago my name was Clara Whitmore. I want to tell you something about the woman I was before I came to Carter Ranch, because I think this room has been making decisions about that woman without knowing anything true about her. The room was entirely still. "I signed a marriage agreement because my family was losing everything and I had the means to stop it," she said. "I signed it knowing what it was and knowing what it would cost me. That was not coercion. That was a choice made by a woman who understood exactly what she was doing and did it with her eyes open." She paused. "The man I married told me on the first day in his kitchen over a cup of coffee that I could leave, that the debt was paid regardless of what I decided, that he would not use my family's situation to bind me to something I didn't want." She let that land. "He gave me freedom when he had every contractual right to do the opposite. That is the man Mr. Holloway is asking you to believe is a predator." She looked at Holloway directly. "This proceeding is not about my welfare," she said. "It is about water rights and land title and a man who wants what belongs to someone else and is willing to use my name and my father's name and the story of a desperate family to get it." Her voice was even, clear. "I did not stay at Carter Ranch because I had nowhere else to go. I did not stay because I was afraid. I stayed because I found something worth staying for, and I will not have that turned into a weapon against the man I chose." The silence that followed lasted about 4 full seconds. Then Harriet Boone from the back of the room began to clap. It was not a wave, it was not a rush. It was one woman 60 years old, the postmistress of Red Willow, Montana, who had told a frightened girl on a porch 3 weeks before to look at a man properly before she decided what he was, clapping steady and deliberate, as though she had been waiting to do it for exactly this long. A few others joined, then more. Fitch looked at Holloway's lawyers. Holloway's lawyers looked at Holloway. Holloway was looking at Clara with the expression of a man who has just understood several moves too late that he has been playing a different game than the one he thought. Gerald Fitch did not render a decision that Friday. He was too careful a man for that, and too experienced with the particular kind of pressure that a room full of people and 2 sets of lawyers and a woman who had just said something that changed the temperature of the air could generate. He called a recess. He asked both parties to remain available. He took the documentation Marcus had submitted, and the documentation Holloway's lawyers had submitted, and he disappeared into the back office of the council hall with 2 of the other council members, and the expression of a man who intended to read everything very slowly before he said a single word. Holloway left the hall without speaking to anyone. His lawyers followed him carrying their leather cases with the particular efficiency of men who had been paid enough to maintain dignity in a loss. Clara watched him go. She stood in the center of the council hall with James beside her and her father 3 feet away, and Harriet Boone making her way through the thinning crowd toward them, and she felt the shake start in her hands, the way it always did. After the thing she'd been holding herself together for was finally over, not during, never during, but in the aftermath when the body remembered it had been frightened and sent the bill. James put his hand over hers. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Her father reached her next. He stopped in front of her, and he looked at her the way he had looked at her when she was 7 years old and had climbed the barn roof and gotten stuck, and he'd come up after her, the specific expression of a man who is simultaneously proud and undone. "Clara," he said. "You did well, Papa," she said. His jaw worked. "I should have." "You told the truth," she said. "That's what mattered today. That's all that mattered." He put his arms around her, and she let him, and her mother appeared at his shoulder with red eyes and the expression of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for weeks and had just been allowed to set it down. Harriet Boone arrived at the edge of the family circle and waited with patient courtesy until there was an opening, and then she looked at Clara with the expression of a woman who has been right about something important and is too dignified to say "I told you so." "You looked at him properly," Harriet said. "I did," Clara said. Harriet looked at James. "And you," she said, "have been waiting for someone like her for longer than you probably know." James looked slightly startled, which was an expression Clara had almost never seen on him, and which she intended to remember for a very long time. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Harriet nodded satisfied and went to find someone else to be correct about. Marcus appeared at James's elbow. "Fitch will have a preliminary determination by tomorrow morning at the latest," he said quietly. "Based on the evidence we submitted, I expect it will go our way. The fraud allegation against Doyle has been forwarded to the Territorial Marshal's office. That's out of Fitch's hands entirely. Holloway's lawyers will advise him to withdraw. Whether he does it gracefully or not is his decision, but the legal position is clear." "And the water rights," James said. "Secure," Marcus said. "The counter-filing creates a record that will make any future challenge significantly harder. He could try again in 5 years with better preparation, but he won't." Marcus paused. "Men like Holloway move to easier targets when the current one proves too costly." James nodded once. Clara looked at Marcus. "Thank you," she said, "for everything you did this week." "Thank the woman who found the date discrepancy," Marcus said, and he picked up his hat and left. They rode back to Carter Ranch in the late afternoon, her parents and siblings following as far as the fork in the road, where the Whitmore farm path split off north. Her father pulled his wagon alongside theirs at the fork and looked at James for a long moment. Something passed between the two men that didn't require words and wouldn't have been improved by them. Her father nodded. James nodded back. It was not forgiveness exactly. It was something more practical than forgiveness, and perhaps more lasting, an acknowledgement between two men that the situation had been what it had been, that neither of them was the villain of it, and that the woman between them had been right about everything worth being right about. Her father clicked to his horse and turned north. Clara watched the wagon go until she couldn't see it anymore. "He'll be all right," James said. "I know," she said. "He's stronger than he thinks he is." She paused. "Most people are." She felt him look at her sideways. "You said Saturday," he said. She turned to look at him. "It's Saturday tomorrow," he said. "It is," she said. "I said I wanted to say something to you when there wasn't a crisis attached to it." "There isn't one," she said. "Not at the moment." "No," he said. "There isn't." They rode the rest of the way home in the particular quiet of two people who have agreed to a conversation and are now carrying it between them, warm and present, waiting for the right moment to open it. The right moment, it turned out, was not that evening. That evening, Carter Ranch had the specific quality of a place exhaling. May produced a dinner that was significantly better than the occasion strictly required. Rupert and Billy sat at the kitchen table longer than usual, and the whole household had the feeling of something that had been braced for impact finally being allowed to relax its posture. There was laughter. Real laughter, not the careful, polite kind, but the kind that arrives when people have been through something together and come out the other side of it and find each other's company genuinely worth having. James sat at the head of the table and said almost nothing, which was entirely normal, but what was not normal was the quality of his silence. It was not the closed silence of a man keeping people at distance. It was the open silence of a man who was simply present and glad of it. Clara watched him when he wasn't watching her. She was not subtle about it by the end of the evening, and she didn't particularly try to be. After May retired, and Rupert and Billy had gone to the bunkhouse and the lamps were burning low, James came to find her in the study, where she had gone with the transparent excuse of reviewing the week's correspondence. She was not reviewing the correspondence. She was sitting at the desk with a pen she hadn't written anything with, and she looked up when he came in. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "You're not doing accounts," he said. "No," she said. He came in and sat in the chair across from her the way he had on a dozen evenings before, and the lamp was between them the way it always was, and she thought about the first time she'd sat in this room with him, the careful distance of strangers who had been handed each other and didn't know what to do with the gift. They had come a long way from that room. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Then tell me," she said. He set his hands flat on the desk. "When my mother died," he said, "I decided I was done needing people, not because I thought it was right, because I thought it was safe." He looked at the desk, then up at her. "I built everything you see out there on that principle. The ranch, the routine, the way I ran every interaction at exactly the distance I decided was appropriate." He paused. "Vivian was right about that. I held her at the length I chose, and I never moved, and when she left I felt nothing but relief, and I told myself that was evidence I'd been right." "James, let me finish," he said. She closed her mouth. "You walked into my stable 6 weeks ago," he said, "and you asked if my horse was all right before you asked anything about yourself, and I thought this one's going to be trouble." A pause. "I was right." She felt something move through her chest, warm and impossible to categorize. "You took apart every distance I tried to keep," he said. "Not deliberately, that's the thing. You weren't trying to reach me. You were just being what you are. And what you are is the most clear-eyed, capable, honest person I have ever known." He stopped. "And I'm in love with you. That's what I wanted to say. I am in love with you, and I have been for long enough that I cannot tell you exactly when it started, and I'm not going to apologize for it, or qualify it, or offer you an escape route from it, because I think you deserve someone who says it plainly." He held her gaze. "I love you, Clara." The lamp burned between them. Outside, Carter Ranch was quiet in the way of a place that has found its rhythm. Clara looked at the man across the desk, at the hands flat on the wood at the jaw, set against the vulnerability of having said something true and undefended, at the eyes that were watching her with the specific, steady patience of a man who had waited his whole life to say something like this, and was prepared to wait as long as it took for the answer. She stood up. She walked around the desk. She sat on the edge of it, directly in front of him, close enough that the distance between them was no longer a neutral thing, and she looked at him the way she had been looking at him for weeks fully, without the management, with everything she'd been keeping behind that locked door. "I love you," she said. "I have been trying very hard not to, and I was making reasonable progress until you got yourself knocked down by a horse on a creek bank, and I found out I was the kind of frightened that only comes from one place." She paused. "You are the most infuriating, patient, decent man I have ever met, and I did not come to Carter Ranch expecting to find you, and I am profoundly grateful that I did." He reached up and took her hand. She looked at their hands. She had signed her name on a piece of paper 6 weeks ago in a kitchen in Red Willow and believed she was signing away her future. She had been wrong about that. She had been signing toward it. He stood, and they were very close, and he put his other hand against her face in the careful way he handled everything he was afraid of damaging, and he looked at her for a long moment with the open, undefended expression she had worked so hard to understand and had come to know was the most honest thing about him. "Saturday," he said. "Saturday," she confirmed. He kissed her. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was not the kind that exists in stories told for effect. It was the kind that happens when two people have been finding their way toward each other through weeks of honest work and difficult days and small persistent kindnesses. And the moment finally arrives when there is simply no more reason to be anywhere but exactly here. It was, Clara thought afterward, the most real thing that had ever happened to her. They stood in the study for a while after, and neither of them said anything, because nothing needed to be added, and the lamp burned low, and outside the window, Carter Ranch settled deeper into its quiet, and the south pasture held its water, and the fence line was intact, and everything that mattered was exactly where it was supposed to be. In the morning, Fitch's written determination arrived by rider before 9 o'clock. Marcus had been right. The council found no evidence of coercion in the Carter marriage. The forged affidavit was formally invalidated and referred to the territorial marshal for investigation. The water rights attached to the south pasture were confirmed as legally belonging to Carter Ranch. The counterfiling against Holloway's agent Doyle was entered into the territorial record. James read the document at the kitchen table. He set it down. He looked at Clara. "It's done," he said. "Yes," she said. "All of it." "All of it," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I keep expecting there to be more to do," he said. "There will be," she said. "There always is, but not today." She pushed his coffee toward him. "Today it's done." He picked up the coffee. Something in his face was different from the face she had first seen in the stable 6 weeks ago. Not the features, those were the same. It was the quality of it. The particular set of a man who has spent decades carrying everything alone and has finally permitted himself to put a portion of it down. She recognized that quality because she felt it in herself. They had both been carrying things. They had both, without quite intending to, begun sharing the weight. 2 weeks later, her family came to dinner. It was May's idea, which was itself significant. May had moved in the weeks since the council meeting from watchful neutrality to the specific warm authority of a woman who had decided something was her household and was going to act accordingly. She had written the invitation herself, which Clara had discovered only when her mother mentioned receiving it, and which had made her laugh for approximately a minute. Her father arrived looking different from the last time she'd seen him. Not younger, not lighter, but more upright. The particular posture of a man who has done the hard thing and is standing up straighter for it. He walked the ranch with James after dinner, the two of them out among the fence lines and the cattle and the long grass of the south pasture, and Clara watched them from the kitchen window. Her father talking with his hands in the way he always did when he was genuinely engaged. James listening with the focused patience she had come to know was his most consistent form of respect. "They'll be fine," May said beside her. "I know," Clara said. "Your father's a good man," May said. "He made a mistake. Good men do." She paused. "The difference is they stand up after." Clara looked at her. "You could have told me that 6 weeks ago," she said. "You weren't ready to hear it 6 weeks ago," May said, and went back to the dishes with the unassailable confidence of a woman who is nearly always right and knows it. Rupert found Clara in the barn that afternoon, checking the feed inventory the way she still did every 2 weeks, because the habit had served her well and she saw no reason to break it. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands. "Mrs. Carter," he said. She looked up. "I want to say something," he said. "Rupert," she said. "You've been saying things to me since the 2nd week. You can just say them." He almost smiled. "Fair enough." He turned his hat once. "When Mr. Carter bought this land 14 years ago, I thought he'd sell in 5 years. He was too young and too alone, and the land was too hard." He paused. "I was wrong. He built something real, but it was only ever land and cattle until—" He stopped. Tried again. "Until there was someone here who made it a place." He looked at her directly. "You made it a place, ma'am. I wanted you to know I see that." She held his gaze. "Thank you, Rupert," she said. He nodded and put his hat back on and left, and she stood in the barn with the feed ledger in her hands and the autumn light coming through the door, and let herself feel the full weight of what he'd said, not as compliment, but as truth. She had made this place, not alone. You never make a place alone. It requires the people in it and the work between you and the time you spend choosing it every single day. But she was part of it. She was woven into it. Carter Ranch was different because she was here, and she was different because she had come here, and neither of those things was something she had planned or predicted on the morning she had signed her name on a kitchen table and believed she was signing away her life. That evening, James found her on the front porch. He came and stood beside her. The sky was doing the thing that Montana skies do in October, enormous and particular, the kind of color that doesn't have a name in ordinary language, something between gold and gray, and the specific blue of a world cooling toward winter. "What are you thinking about?" he said. "The morning I left home," she said. "I didn't look back. I made myself not look back, because I thought if I did, I'd lose whatever I'd managed to hold together. And now I think I was holding together the wrong things," she said. "I was holding together the wall, all that careful distance." She paused. "I should have been holding together something else." "What?" She turned and looked at him. "The willingness to be surprised," she said. He looked at her with that expression. The real one, the unmanaged one, the one that had nothing to do with the controlled man he'd built himself into, and everything to do with who he actually was underneath all that careful construction. "I didn't expect you," he said. "I know," she said. "I want you to know that," he said. "Whatever I thought this would be when I made the arrangement with your father, I didn't expect you. I didn't expect any of it." "Neither did I," she said. "That's the part that matters." He put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, and they stood on the porch of Carter Ranch in the October evening and looked at the land that had been fought over and defended and nearly lost, and was now simply completely theirs. Not his, not hers, theirs. The word had weight. The word had history in it. 6 weeks of history, which was not very long by the ordinary measure of things, and was somehow also long enough to contain everything that mattered. That night, Clara sat at the desk in the study for a long time after James had gone to bed. She had a letter to write, a final one, to no one in particular, the kind you write when you need to put something down outside yourself so you can look at it properly. She wrote, "I came here with a locked door and the key in my pocket. I was going to survive this. I was going to manage it. I was not going to feel anything I hadn't planned to feel." She paused. She wrote, "I was wrong about almost everything." She held the pen above the paper for a moment. Then she wrote, "I was wrong about the man. I was wrong about the marriage. I was wrong about what I was capable of and what I was willing to risk, and what love actually looks like when it arrives in your life, which is nothing like the stories and nothing like the warnings and nothing like what you were bracing for. It looks like a man who reads to his dying mother for 11 nights and never tells anyone. It looks like a covered dish on an old man's porch in the dark. It looks like someone who gave me freedom when he had every right to keep me and kept me anyway by never once trying to." She set the pen down. She looked at the paper. She folded it once and put it in the drawer and blew out the lamp and went to bed, and the house was quiet around her, and Carter Ranch breathed in the dark, and everything that had been broken was repaired, and everything that had been feared had become the thing she reached for without thinking. And the woman who had signed her name on a kitchen table believing her life was over had discovered something that no one could have told her, and she would not have believed if they had. Some endings are not endings at all. Some contracts signed in desperation turn out to be the document that leads you home. Some men who seem cold are simply men who have been waiting without knowing it for the one person who would look at them carefully enough to see the fire that had been burning the whole time, quietly, steadily, needing only the right kind of witness to become the warmth that changes everything. Clara Carter had been that witness, and James Carter, who had spent 14 years building a ranch that no one could take from him, had finally built the one thing he had not known he was missing. A life that was worth the land it stood on, because the right person was standing in it beside him. That was the whole of it. That was enough. That was more than enough. It was everything.